Steve is the host of MSNBC's program Up. He just was broadcasting this morning and then came over here and is a senior political correspondent for Salon.com. His entry into covering politics was in New Jersey, and though you may not guess it to look at him, the person who hired him into New Jersey was someone who was mentioned in this morning's session, Wally Edge, who became governor of New Jersey in 1917 and then somehow hired Steve later on, which he can explain. His work has appeared in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, New York Daily News, New York Post, the Boston Globe, and he is becoming a fixture of national political commentary, and it's wonderful that he agreed to be here today. So, Steve.
Well, thanks for that, and it's great to be back in New Jersey. Great to be back at Rutgers. Just to, I guess, to sort of follow up on the observation John just made there about being hired by Wally Edge. It kind of fits into where I want to sort of start with this discussion with the governors, and that is that the reason I was hired by Wally Edge, that you can say that, is that in the year 2000 in this state, a website called politicsnj.com was created. And it was anonymously owned, it was anonymously written, anonymously edited, nobody knew who was behind it. It came out basically just at the time of the U.S. Senate race that year. So Governor Florio was in the primary against John Corzine. There was a Republican race going on, and this website sprouted up. And it had all sorts of inside information, insight, original reporting that you couldn't get anywhere else in the state. It also was a sort of a clearinghouse for all the different, the Asbury Park Press articles of the day, the Bergen Record stories of the day, Crier Post stories of the day. They would all be sort of put in one place. This was started in the year 2000. The anonymous owner and editor was named Wally Edge. He took his name after the former governor, who's also gotten a bit of a third life, I guess you could say, through Boardwalk Empire the last couple of years. But anyway, he started this, Wally did, in early 2000. Got some attention. I don't think the political world knew quite what to make of him and the site. And Stu Rothenberg, who's a national political commentator, wrote a column basically in 2002 where he said that he liked the site, he found the information useful, but ultimately he didn't trust the site because there was no name behind it. And so Wally Edge, that editor and owner, made a decision that he would hire somebody to do. First of all, to be sort of the legitimate face of the enterprise, but also to do actual, traditional reporting, writing, being responsible for the content on the site, being responsible for what's written, being responsible for a byline. So that is how I ended up in New Jersey, and that was in 2002. It was the first writer for this site called politicsnj.com, which through several changes over the years is now known as politickernj.com. But that's the story. 13 years ago, politicsnj.com. I realize I haven't formally introduced the panel, but I will formally introduce them and then ask them a question sort of tied to that. But the three former governors here, you all know who they are. I don't think they require any introduction, but from 1973 to 1981, Brendan Byrne was the Democratic governor of this state. From 1993 until, it's 2000, or did it actually go over into 2001?
Early 2001.
2001, because she left for the EPA, but Christine Todd Whitman was the two-term Republican governor of the state. And Jim Florio from 1989 to 1993 was the Democratic governor of the state. And the reason for that sort of lengthy buildup there about politicsnj.com is because I think what politicsnj.com symbolized was, it really was the first state-specific web-based news site anywhere in the country. What Wally Edge created in 2000 and what I started reporting for in 2002 changed in a lot of ways here in New Jersey and then sort of created a model nationally. It was a bit ahead of its time. I mean, now we all look online as probably our first source for the news. This was a radical concept when politicsnj.com began. And I guess I just would be curious, you each represent very distinct times in modern New Jersey history in terms of your governorships. I guess if you could just speak to what you see as the major differences between how you as a governor interacted with the media and used the media when you're governor then, and how a governor like Chris Christie or any governor today would interact with and use the media? What are the major changes, Governor Byrne, from when you were governor to today?
I don't think it's a historical thing. I think it's a day-to-day thing. And you give me the existing media and the existing governor, and you got a situation. So I don't think that you can say, well, you were governor in 1975, and so you got such and such a situation. It doesn't happen. In my opinion, it doesn't happen.
Governor Whitman?
Well, I think the biggest difference is you used to have to do everything through the formal press conference or with the established media, as it were, as a way to get your message out, other than the town meetings that you held. Now you can just go on the internet and directly, you could Twitter. Everybody Twitters. They have a Twitter account, or they tweet, or whatever it is you do on that. I don't understand hashtag. I don't get it, but anyway. And everybody has a blog, and that's a totally different way. And what I think it's resulted in is you see a media now that the quote-unquote State House press is a lot younger, with a lot less of the institutional knowledge and history, the historical background of the state, and you don't see things, I don't believe, quite in the depth as you used to see them before. Plus the fact, my personal bias, because the pressure is to be constantly coming up with something new, because it's a 24/7 media cycle, now you have anonymous sources that are given the same amount of credibility as someone who's willing to stand by their quotes, and that to me is very problematic, because you have no idea how to balance that, because you don't know what their particular bias might be.
And Governor Florio?
Well, I think the economics of the media has changed dramatically, particularly the print press. I mean, I can remember, I see some people here that probably can remember Mort Pye, who was the head of the Star-Ledger, when the Star-Ledger was really the peak. And they'd have reporters who were transportation reporters, environmental reporters, education reporters, healthcare reporters, reporters who knew something about what they were writing about. And it was a pleasure. The Asbury Park Press had a wonderful business section. You could talk to the reporters about monetary policy or fiscal policy or things like that. Nowadays, because of the economics, they don't have that degree of depth. As a matter of fact, almost no depth, because reporters are charged with getting an assignment in this area, that they know nothing about. And that makes it very difficult to try to communicate with people when you're talking about something they don't have the foggiest notion about any minimum degree of depth. So it's a very different scene from that standpoint. And it means also that they don't know what you're saying. So if you're saying something inaccurate, they pick it up and they'll put it out there. Even by accident things go out there. So I think that's the dominant change, and particularly with print press.
Well, you know, New Jersey, I think, at sort of all times in its sort of modern history, has always been notoriously hard to communicate in if you're a politician. If you're a governor, if you're a candidate, you have the Philadelphia market, you have the New York market. You had NJN, you have a version of NJN now that's very different, I guess is the polite word. You have News 12. You have New York and Philadelphia affiliate stations that, you know, do not treat New Jersey as the most important thing. The New York Times essentially stopped covering New Jersey politics day to day a while ago. They made that decision. In this atmosphere, how can a governor or a candidate for governor, what are the keys to communicating with the public, to communicating with average voters, given how expensive it is to advertise and how the press corps within the state is consolidated right now, and how the New York and New York and Philadelphia press corps doesn't care maybe as much as it once did?
Well, if you establish a persona like the current governor, you get to go on all the late-night talk shows, and that's what people want to see. I mean, that's what people watch. They see it, and they hear him. And again, it gets back to the ability to communicate through the internet, through the various tools that the internet has given governors and politicians. Other than that, it's spend a lot of money, because it's either the New Jersey media, depending on what's happening in California, is either the first and third or the second and fourth most expensive media markets in the country. And I think each one of us, after we ran, could have easily been mayor of New York City, which was up that year, or mayor of Philadelphia, or governor of either of those states, because so much of the advertising was wasted, was, spent on people who didn't live in your state, who could never vote for you. So at least with the modern technology, you can pinpoint to much more directly. And then there is this appetite, it seems, on many of the shows that are on today to have political figures on them and give them an opportunity to talk, and that's where people are. And never forget the door-to-door. You still have to do that.
Well, how important would you say the print press in New Jersey is right now? The Star Ledger, the Record, the traditional New Jersey print press. We've talked so much in various forums about consolidation, about layoffs, about the threat to shut down papers in this state. How important, compared to years ago, is the print press in terms of getting a message out for a governor and communicating with the public?
Well, the print press is the initial acceptor of a story. In other words, when you get interviewed at a television station, the guy who's interviewing you has a bunch of press clips, so that the source of his information is the press clips, and then he goes from there, or she goes from there, or it goes from there. I don't know.
I can vouch for that. On the show I do right now, we have guests coming in from we'll cover a political fight in Wyoming or something, and I drove through Wyoming once. There's no speed limit. I was going real fast, so I don't remember much of it. But the first thing I will do is I'll Google the name and I'll get the local press readout on that. But I wonder, you talk, Governor Whitman and Governor Flory, you talk about how much younger the reporters are these days, the lack of institutional memory. Is the state, do you feel the state is as well served today by the print press as it once was?
It's clear that it's not. I mean, I don't think anybody would really dispute that, including the press. I mean, we had at one point, I think something like 19 newspapers, daily newspapers circulating in New Jersey, and I think now it's down to whatever it is, 6 or 7 newspapers. And the in-depth analysis is obviously not there in the same way it was. I mean, it's interesting, I don't know if any of you are familiar with New Jersey Spotlight, but it's an online news service that is really the ideal. I mean, when they cover a hearing or something of that sort, you'll get full coverage. At the end of the article, you'll know everybody's views about it. That's the way the Star Ledger used to write. As a matter of fact, they were criticized from time to time for having too much coverage of things. But the Star Ledger was the paper of record in New Jersey. But all the papers in New Jersey had State House coverage. They had people there in the State House operating. Now, there's very few people there, and there's even collaborations. Gannett has taken over so many of the papers. I think the Record and the Star Ledger now collaborate to keep the number down of people. So I think the clear, quick answer to your question is no, New Jersey is not as well served by the print press as it used to be.
There's a certain school of thought that can talk about, sort of a bygone era when the press, when the working press was closer, had closer relationships, had more intimate relationships with the people they covered, with the governors, with the people in the administration, because they were a little older, maybe they had a little bit more institutional memory, and this was a place where they were going to be for a long time. They were sort of putting down roots, members of the press. I wonder if you could talk about some of the relationships you, in your political careers in New Jersey, were able to develop with members of the press. Were there, because the debate sort of on the media side is always like, it's good to be close because then you learn things you'll never learn otherwise. There's a danger in being close because then maybe you'll shield the public from things they deserve to know. But from the standpoint of a politician, I'm wondering if you could talk about some of those relationships maybe that you were able to develop, how they developed and how they worked for both you and the press.
Well, John Farmer was my press secretary for a while. He was with the Newark News. He had covered me when I was an assistant prosecutor. And he still is around. So there's a certain amount of sameness, although I have to admit that there are a lot of people who are called media who don't know what they're doing.
I would say you had to be very careful about that. There were clearly reporters who cared more about the subject areas on which they were reporting, and you could have more in-depth conversations with them. And there were some, I think that it's just in human relations, you felt that they gave you a little bit fairer break, or they listened a little bit better than some of the others. But I can't say that there was a reporter that I picked out that became a buddy that I would feed a story to. In fact, I actually think I got into a little trouble because it had been kind of the tradition that because the Star-Ledger was the paper of record for the state of New Jersey, that they got a heads up on every major thing that was happening ahead of time. And I didn't think that was fair. I didn't like that. I wanted to give the other papers more of a chance. And I'm not sure Mort Pye ever forgave me for that. I didn't quite get the coverage I thought I might get afterwards.
Do you
with the
think
Ledger.
that affected the coverage of the Ledger
I think
afterwards?
so, yeah. I think they were a little mad at me. I don't blame them. I mean, they'd had the inside track, and I cut it off, which wasn't the brightest thing that I did in my term, but there were other not so bright things.
Mort Pye, who used to be the editor of the Star-Ledger, and at whose funeral service I did a eulogy, would use his leverage to demand things from you. I mean, he would want my annual message the day before I delivered it. And if I didn't give it to him, he would, as he in his own language put it, I'll do a knockdown story. And so he got most of what he wanted.
Is it,
Actually, it's true.
On the other hand, sometimes I would use the press to do something. I remember one time there was something where I wanted to get something out, and it wasn't sizzling news, but I managed to focus on it and get my side of the story out before the other side got his side.
It's interesting, the Star-Ledger and the Philadelphia Inquirer still insist upon exclusivity in terms of an op-ed piece or something of that sort. If you give it to everybody else at the same time, they won't print it. But the point that Brendan just mentioned about using the press, John Shaw was my press secretary. And one day we wanted to put something out. We had a good report, a good employment report. Good numbers went up or something. We wanted to put something out. And we said, if we send out a press release to all the papers, it's going to go in the bottom of the pile in their office. It's no big deal as far as they're concerned. What John did, he called up the Star-Ledger reporter, I forget who it was at the time, and said, would you like an exclusive of something we're going to put out next week, but we'll give it to you in advance. And the next day, we put it out, gave it to them in advance, made headlines. Employment numbers go up, whatever. And probably if we had done it the other way, nobody would have printed it.
everybody loves this, yeah, I think I printed a few of those at politicsnj.com. I look back, I say, boy, I really took the bait on that one, that's for sure.
We used to try to save our good stories for Sunday. And we'd give it to the Ledger and to the old Newark News for Sunday. And it would get covered. The Newark News, when it existed, and it did for a while, the Newark News would be the source that you wanted to carry your story. And so, what the Ledger, the Newark News and the Ledger would both put out a Sunday edition on Saturday night. And the Ledger would go to Board and Market Street in Newark and buy the 10 o'clock edition and change its story for Sunday morning based on what the Newark News was publishing on Saturday night.
And the other thing you do, of course, when you didn't want them to cover it very much, is put it out Friday afternoon, late on Friday afternoon when all the reporters were finished with their stories and leaving.
And they still do that one too.
Oh, yeah.
That's for sure. Well, we've heard the name Mort Pie come up a few times already in this discussion, and the idea of this sort of towering, imposing, intimidating
He was tiny. He wasn't
Psychically.
towering at all. He was tiny.
figure who could, at the snap of his finger, kind of get his way from. Is there anybody like that on the journalism scene in New Jersey today?
Boy, I don't see it.
Not
I
quite.
don't see it. I don't see it.
Not quite, but close, or?
Well, all of the editors are sensitive to their priorities, and will let you know if you're on the humiliating side of a story.
I think there's much more of an inclination now for the editors and the publishers to be more sensitive to the economics of things. You get, from what I hear, much more intrusion into the news side from the business side. In the past, there was this point of pride that people would not be influenced by the advertisements or the advertisers in the news thing. I don't think that exists to the same
Now,
degree.
that's a big question with the New York Times. I mean, they went through that agony because they've now instituted a much more active role of the business side of the paper in the editorial side. And that's called into question some things.
Right, well, and the basic economic model of newspapers is sort of, I mean, classified ads being at the heart of it for all those years, and then this thing called Craigslist comes along, and the newspaper industry in a lot of ways is still trying to recover. I wanted to talk to you guys about another form of media, because it's not just about newspapers. It's something that had a powerful effect on this state, and that is talk radio. And the emergence of NJ 101.5, and it certainly played a central role in the election that Governor Fleur, Governor Whitman, when you two were opponents in 1993, and in sort of what's remembered as the tax revolt in the state in the early 1990s. Can you talk, Governor Fleur, since you were governor when that happened, can you talk about what the circumstances were like back then and what the rise of NJ 101.5 meant and represented?
It was interesting. After I left office, I had a position with WCTC, which is a station in New Brunswick. They asked me if I'd do an hour talk show. So I said yes. And I advertised my firm, my show, as being a demonstration that talk radio doesn't have to be stupid. Well, obviously, 101.5 sort of established its reputation on me, which was fine. But I think from the public interest standpoint, talk radio has become a political force, for the most part on the right as opposed to the left. I understand there are left shows. I don't know what they are, but apparently people have mentioned that there are some talk radio hosts who are extreme on the left as opposed to extreme on the right. But it's a force. It's a force. There are people that swear by it. It's a problem in terms of just general citizenship. If we have, not only with cable, MSNBC on the one side, Fox on the other side, and the talk radio shows out there, people are getting exclusive information from one source or the other source, which really puts in question the whole governance of a democracy, where people are theoretically supposed to be making choices between options. But if you never hear the option because you only subscribe to this radio program or this cable television, that's something to be concerned about.
And it was, I mean, the rise of conservative talk radio really was sort of a phenomenon of the 80s and the early 90s here and nationally. And Governor Whitman, we talk about NJ 101.5, which was, it made its reputation as sort of the conservative talk station, the voice of the conservative tax revolt in the early 1990s. Can you talk about the role that played in getting you into office, but then once you were there, I imagine they had some expectations for you, and that might have created some issues as well.
Oh, yeah, no, they were clearly a very important force that I used. I actually had a talk show on them in the intervening years between 1990 when I'd run for the Senate and when I ran for governor. So I brought in people and talked about New Jersey issues on that for a while. And then they clearly were not big friends of Governor Florio. And so they were always out there pounding it and pounding the tax issue, which is what I ran on. But I have to say that at the end of the day, I really think it was Howard Stern that put me over the top. I mean, when Howard Stern talk radio, when he endorsed me, that was, I mean, I still meet a lot of normal-looking people in business suits and things who say they listen to Howard Stern, and I'm always fascinated because I've never listened to him. But once he supports you, he supports you. And
Well-
funnily enough, I mean, you laugh about it, and I do laugh about it because I hadn't a clue who he was when I actually called into the show, because he said he'd endorsed the first candidate for governor who reached him, and for some reason, your staff wasn't listening to Howard Stern that day.
How come they didn't call Governor Florio?
I wasn't prepared to let him name a rest stop. That was, I think, the quid pro quo.
Well, I could think of nothing more perfect for Howard Stern than a urinal. I mean, to me, that was the perfect thing. But it really did make a difference, because you heard people both from obviously the 101.5 appeal to a certain group of people, many of whom were the quote-unquote base of the Republican Party, particularly at that time, the people who were really excited and motivated. But the Stern people loved him, and they listened to what he said, and they did things based on his endorsement, which is sort of surprising, and it speaks to what Governor Florio was saying about what that means for society today. And one of the problems, or the advantages, as good as the internet is, what we're seeing more and more of, according to all the studies, is that people only subscribe to one website. They only listen to the radio station that confirms their beliefs.
Yeah.
And the things that reaffirm what they already think. And that's, I think, that's very problematic as far as I'm concerned.
When Dick Cody had his 14 months as the acting governor in 2004 and 2005, one of the, at least from a public relations standpoint, highlights of it was when one of the 101.5 hosts made a disparaging comment about his wife, and he heard about it. He went down to the station and he challenged the guy to a fist fight, and his poll numbers went up, I think, by 10 points or so after that. Nick Acacella, who's a PolitiFact journalist, said if he'd actually popped the guy, they would have gone up 20. But Governor Byrne, when you look at, Governor Whitman cites Howard Stern, who now is no longer on, what do they call it, terrestrial radio. He's on satellite radio now. Bob Grant was a big name in the early 1990s, part of that conservative talk radio revolution. NJ 101.5 is still around today. Do you look at that, though, as sort of a moment that's passed? Is talk radio sort of a relic, conservative talk radio in this state as a political force, a relic of a different era, or do you still think it's a powerful force today?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. People have a preconceived idea of what should be what, and they will listen to whoever confirms that. And Bob Grant, by the way, was a buddy of mine. I mean, he was outrageous. And people listened to him and listened to the outrageous stuff. And if they believed it, they believed it. If they didn't believe it, they didn't believe it. I don't think he swung many voices with his point of view, but he was there, and I enjoyed listening to him heckle. I mean, he never said a good word about any Democrat.
If he went after you, did you enjoy it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
He could be, because I can remember when he, and I'm trying to remember now who he had on, but he made some racial comments. I'd been on him a couple of times, and he was obviously a conservative broadcaster. I didn't agree with a lot of what he said, but, he'd have me on, so he went on. And then he said something, it was after I was governor, he said something that was very racially slanted, and I can remember I said I wouldn't go on him again until he apologized, and he wouldn't apologize, and boy, did he dump all over me after that. But then I went into the studio with him and said, I'll say it to your face. I can't continue to go on when you will make these kinds of disparaging comments. And I think Governor Byrne's absolutely right when he says that because people are listening to people with whom they already agree, they're probably none of these talk show hosts are changing many votes or opinions. But I think what they do, and what worries me, is they stir up people and stir up their emotions, and you get people that say some pretty, language shapes behavior after a while, and we have some pretty outrageous language being used on these shows, and that's going to, I think, be problematic for us. It's going to lead to some bad behavior.
I mean, that almost precludes the orderly development of democracy. If in fact you have listening to someone who talks about people on the other side as not being opponents, but being enemies, if you start talking about the opposition views as not representing anything other than evil, you really tear people apart. The good news about this whole thing is that many of these extreme commentators, radio, television, whatever, they ultimately destroy themselves just because they have to have more and more extreme views to keep the audience attentive. And accordingly, they start eating their own. I mean, you're starting to see with Rush Limbaugh now, starting to beat up Republicans because they're not pure enough for his satisfaction. Same thing with Grant. Same type of thing. So that's the good news, that they ultimately destroy themselves, but before that comes, they do a lot of damage.
You know, and I don't mean to dwell on it, because I know it was a very difficult period for you politically. You also won a Profile and Courage Award for what you did at the time, but I'm curious, as a governor, going through, say ultimately when you ran against Governor Whitman in 1993, it's one of the closest elections the state ever saw. You came back from poll numbers that were very low and nearly got reelected in 1993, but at sort of the low ebb of that, like in 1991 or so, when like NJ 101.5 and all these sort of conservative talk radio forces are piling on. As a governor, how did you and your team deal with that? Did you try to sort of get through back channels to calm them down, to explain things to them? Was there any kind of strategy? What was it like to be governor during a period like that, and sort of the strategic thinking that comes in a period like that?
Well, you have to develop elephant skin. I mean, in terms of just being, but it's not so much the politics of it, it's just the personal relationships. I mean, we had people out in front of Drumthwacket with signs, a picture of me as Hitler and things of that sort. I mean, so it was not rational, but if you're in this business, you have to learn how to deal with that sort of thing. But the way we dealt with it issue-wise was try to change the subject. We did a whole lot of things on the environment. We did some, the Clean Water Act that we passed in New Jersey, cleaned up the Jersey Shore. But interesting enough, I remember we had a big press conference. John Shaw organized this big press conference on the beach, I forget which, Spring Lake, I think it was. And we were announcing the signing of this bill, which was the toughest Clean Water Protection Act. We got rid of medical waste being dumped in the ocean, garbage and things of that sort. And one of the papers, I forget which one, wrote the story saying, Florio today held an event trying to avoid continuing criticism over income taxes, signing this bill, whatever. So you have to deal with that sort of thing.
Yeah. And I also wanted to, we talked a little bit about talk radio. I wanted to talk about what was the dominant television source of news in this state for the longest time, and that was NJN, the New Jersey Network. There is now, NJTV, but NJN, as it was known, I think, by everybody in this room and everybody on this stage for years, sort of doesn't exist the way it was known anymore. I'm curious if you can talk about what the demise of NJN and what we're sort of left with now, what that has meant for the state and what that means for any leader in this state trying to communicate in this state. What has the change at NJ, the demise of NJN meant?
I think it's a real shame that it is gone. I mean, I have to admit that we started to get them to do more aggressive fundraising on their own so they weren't quite as dependent on the state, because I was always slightly torn by how independent could a television station be that was totally funded by the state. I mean, could they really be critical, or were they going to worry that because they were critical they weren't going to get the next year's money in the budget? So we had a very dynamic, Tiz Christofferson was a very dynamic chairman of that and raised a lot of money for it so that it could continue on its own. But otherwise, as you pointed out earlier, we are, as Benjamin Franklin said, the valley of humility between two mountains of conceit. And everything is interpreted by those two mountains, New York and Philadelphia, and we just don't get the coverage.
And Governor Byrne, what do you think with no NJN as we've known it, what has that meant for the state?
Well, no matter what, I rely, frankly, for New Jersey news on the Ledger. And you know the Ledger is going to cover a certain amount of the news, and will look to cover a certain amount of the news. I think that the Ledger's point of view is important. And that's why I write for the Ledger.
He's getting a plug in here, I think.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, please. go ahead.
Just, I mean, the only observation I'd make is that NJN and the new people do a reasonably competent job of doing what they're doing. Their audience is minuscule. I mean, so they really have no great impact. There's a handful, I don't know what the actual number is, but I would venture to say maybe 20,000 people watch it, if that many. But they're decision makers, so they're important people if you want to communicate with the inside group of state people. But as Governor Whitman talked about, we don't really get the coverage that we should TV-wise. I mean, if you're a pyromaniac and there's a fire in South Jersey, the Inquirer will cover it,
Right.
and you'll be happy. But there's not a whole. You have to decapitate somebody or burn down a house in order to get coverage.
You're giving some politicians ideas here, maybe. I don't know, to get some press coverage. I used to do Reporters Roundtable on NJN with Michael Aaron. Great show. I would do it periodically. I watched it every week when I was here. I still watch it if I can. But I always thought it was kind of odd when NJN was around. They would give you a $50 stipend for appearing on the show. Come a few weeks later, it was optional. I was working for a website that had no money, so I took the money. And it would be signed by the state treasurer. And so occasionally we'd have questions about the state treasurer on the show, and it was something I would be, I didn't think the check wouldn't come if I said something bad about John McCormick, but I always thought there was a little bit of irony there. I also wanted to get into a little bit about what happens when New Jersey politics, when you as a New Jersey governor become a national story. We talk about the day-to-day New Jersey press being in Trenton, but what happens when there's an event that takes place in Trenton or there's an event that takes place in New Jersey politics and suddenly, CBS, NBC, Fox, CNN, they're all descending on Trenton. You two, obviously, your election and in the immediate aftermath of that, it was such a close election, and then there were some controversy over how that election ended. It sort of happened then. Governor Whitman, you were rumored to be a vice presidential prospect in 1996. You delivered the State of the Union response in 96 that year. What is it like when the national press comes and tries to cover you as a New Jersey governor?
I mean, it's always interesting. We got national press when I signed the bill outlawing assault weapons. We had people coming. It was always interesting because they were coming in, flew in, mispronounced people's names. It was clear that they were there for the event and really didn't know a whole lot. But they're stars, they're media stars when they show up. So it is an interesting thing to have the people come in from the national. They almost feel, you get the sense that they, except for the ones coming out of New York, the people that came from the national press felt like they were going to dog patch. It was not something, a little bit of condescension.
But does that end up, I mean, because we talk about the difficulties of communicating the state, does that end up having a much bigger effect in shaping everyday voters' perceptions in this state, just because of the fact that it's suddenly on a national network?
I think it's fair to say yes.
Yeah,
I mean, people think you're a star if you show up on the nightly news as opposed to NJN.
Right.
Yeah, no, there's no question about it, but I can remember when it first happened during the gubernatorial campaign, because I got a fair amount after the 1990 Senate race, but Governor Florio's campaign was questioning the legitimacy of the farm on which he lives. So we decided to have a farm day, and we brought all the press out, and we had them all. And I will never forget one lady, and I don't know which of the major stations she was from, but she was in her Armani suit and her stiletto heels, and she was in the barnyard holding a microphone up to the cow saying, "Say moo." And you wanted to say, I don't think you get it. I don't think you really know what a farm is. But, made it, what we did is we gave them this very nice picnic lunch, soup to nuts on it, and then we said at the end of the day, everything you ate came off the farm, because it had. I mean, down to the hamburgers and the lamb chops and everything that we served them had come from the farm. So the point got across, but it really was funny to see the national media so totally out of their depth. They had no clue what a farm was. No, just looked at her.
Governor Byrne, did you have moments as governor when you and when New Jersey became the big national story?
No.
Well, you did have a comeback for the ages, I know, in 1977 to win your win your second term. But it brings us maybe to the other a governor who unquestionably has sort of been a national story since his inauguration, Chris Christie. Chris Christie gets as much, if not more, attention. We've talked about this a little bit from the national press than he does from the press here. What do you see as the key to why has Chris Christie so successfully and sort of so enduringly for 4 years now been such a national star from the media standpoint?
Because he's Chris Christie. Oh, seriously. Chris Christie is unique. And he has been from the get-go. When Chris Christie was the United States Attorney, the United States Attorney was a newsworthy person in New Jersey. He was. You don't even know who the U.S. Attorney is today. Do you? No.
Yeah, somebody just said you should be thankful if you don't know who it is, probably, right?
Chris Christie is unique in this business. And I think the rest of us who ever sought publicity are jealous of him because he can do it, and he has done it. And everything he does now gets attention.
Well, it's interesting, too. I can tell you from the standpoint, Governor Whitman was nice enough to do our show a couple weeks ago, was a great guest on our show. I have worked the back channels as best I can through people who would know Governor Christie to try to get him to come on our show, because I know it's ratings gold if we can get Chris Christie on our show. And I think that experience is true for other television personalities and for reporters in general, where because of Chris Christie's stature right now, anytime you can get an audience with Chris Christie, you're going to make news, your story is going to go viral on Twitter. And I wonder, Governor Whitman, do you think that affects the way the press covers him a little bit, that just the fact of getting him to say yes to an interview with you, getting him to acknowledge you, is going to do something for you as a reporter?
Oh, without question. Without question. And I think what it reflects is the public is hungry for someone who will speak their mind and mean it. And, you know, over time, they may question whether a little bit more of a filter between what he thinks and what he says, or how he says it. But, you know, right now he is a leader. He's clearly a leader, and that's what people want to see. And obviously, it is going to affect, I think, those who interview him. They're going to be a little more careful than they might be otherwise, because they're going to want him back. As long as he is this persona that draws a crowd and draws viewership, you're not going to embarrass him. And it'd be pretty hard to do anyway, because he'd be right back at you if you tried to embarrass him too much. But, you know, again, it certainly affects, too, the way I think the New Jersey press looks at him. I mean, they're as awed by the national media stars as they are by him. And the fact that the national media stars seek him out makes him perhaps a bigger deal here than he might be even otherwise.
It almost is there an interest? I'm not trying to. Is there an interest in the New Jersey press corps almost of making him a national figure, because then it makes New Jersey a national story?
Yeah, I would think that would be the case. I mean, it's also, I mean, that he is unique in the sense that he's almost violated all the traditional rules and is prospered by it.
Right.
Because people are looking for things that are different. I mean, the governor's called people to their face liars and fired his cabinet people and done a couple of other things. So, but he has been able to tap into the temper of the times when people are looking for answers, clear answers. I mean, the economy has been very difficult for a lot of people in this state for a long time. And I've had people come up to me and say, you know, I'm working, my wife is working, and we still can't make it. Nothing seems to work. So people need structure. And therefore, someone that comes forward, as the governor has come forward, with clear, definitive, loud, direct answers, has an audience. And so, I mean, that's something. And celebritydom now is more and more, even transcending politics. Celebritydom is a marketable commodity. I mean, Cory Booker is a good example of the same type of thing. I mean, was the mayor of Newark. Who would have thought the mayor of Newark would be on Oprah, or the mayor of Newark would be a celebrity? And he has the same celebrity characteristics that the governor has.
And what has that meant in terms of his ability to impose his agenda and to get his agenda through in Trenton?
I think it's a two-edged sword. You know, some people get resentful, or as Governor Burns said, are jealous, and they may not admit that that's what it is, but they are, and they want to smack them around a little bit. I also think from, and I think we discussed this before, when you look at it from the broader political spectrum, they're going to be putting the National Democrat Party is going to be putting a little more pressure on the Democrats in New Jersey to start denying the governor some things, because they're worried they gave him too big a buy on this last election. And they didn't concentrate here. They concentrated on the legislative races, and now they're worried about what he will do in 2016.
From a policy
The
standpoint,
Democrats ran a terribly weak candidate for governor. I mean, there were people who said to me, I don't like Christie. I don't want to vote for Christie, but I don't want to vote for this lady either. And frankly, I called on her early in the campaign to resign and appoint somebody as a candidate who could make a better run. Nobody would have beaten.
I meant,
I
when
wanted
you,
to-
when you,
just-
when you told her,
and
did you hear from her after you said that? After you called on her, after you called on Barbara Bono to get out of the race, did you hear from her? Did you talk to her after that?
No.
Go ahead, Governor.
I just wanted to make on the question of celebrities, one of the problematic aspects of that is that as the problems are growing more and more complex, and they are, policy problems are becoming much more complex, the celebrity status factor is really troubling because it talks about simplification. If you're going to get your 15 minutes of fame by being a celebrity, you don't have to go in depth to anything. So trying to deal with complex problems with oversimplifications in terms of how to deal with them is inevitably going to be a failure and being very frustrating to a lot of people.
And it also raises the level of expectations that people have, that if you don't get things right, and because they are complicated, it's going to take time, you're not going to get everything right wholly, as we see going on today, right away, then all of a sudden they turn on you. The higher you go, the faster you can come down, as they say, and people kind of look for that, in the press particularly. They'll build somebody up to eventually knock the legs out from under them, and that gets easier as the problems get more complex, because the answers aren't going to be simple, and nobody's ever going to be 100% satisfied. I mean, they never are, but the more visibility you have as you try to work your way through these things, the more the pressure is on you to do it. Get rid of it right away. Solve this whole problem right now and make it better.
Well, so what do you think Chris Christie is in for the next few years? Because clearly he's interested. He's going to run. He wants to run for president in 2016. That's probably the fairest way to say it. He's going to have to. That means sometime in the next year and a half or so, start making the trips. He's going to be the chairman of the Republican Governors Association, so he's going to be on the road a lot in the next year. And he's, at least right now, he's starting out as somebody with an awful lot of party establishment support. There's going to be a lot of people in the party establishment who think this is our ticket, this is the guy we want. In terms of balancing being the governor, balancing dealing with the New Jersey press here, maybe a Democratic Party here that as you're saying, is feeling a little bit more pressure to stand up to him, and then actually going out there and trying to run a presidential campaign. What do you think he's in for over the next few
He's
years?
going to have a lot of things piling up that he's going to have to do something about. When we passed last year, either last year or the year before, we passed a bond issue to rebuild college campuses. I was asked to sponsor and be chairman of the campaign to get that bond issue passed. I said to the powers that be, tell me how you're going to pay for this. This is new. Tell me how you're going to pay for this bond issue, and I'll be happy to sponsor it. I sponsor it and campaign for it. I never heard from them again. They're not paying off the bonds. They're rolling them over, not paying them over, and paying the interest out of current assets or current budget is something that's not working. So you're gonna have a lot of trouble deferring maintenance on capital improvements. All of these things are things which you can hide for a while, but eventually you're gonna have to face.
We've seen this pop up in past presidential campaigns when governors have tried to run for the presidency, and maybe sometimes they try to paper over, a mounting deficit or whatever it happens to be, and it does sometimes come back to haunt them in the presidential
Oh,
race.
yeah. Now, he's got business he's got to do here in New Jersey, and I think his biggest challenge is going to be to resist the pressure he's going to be under to put himself out as much as he can across the nation to build up support. And of course, he is the marquee person. And every candidate, you've got, 35, 36 gubernatorial races next year. They're all going to want him. All the Republican candidates are going to want him because he's going to be a meal ticket. He'll bring in a lot of money for them. And his challenge is going to be not getting sucked into that to the point that he forgets the state. Because if he forgets the state, that's going to come back and bite him when he wants to take another step, if that's what he wants to do. And he said repeatedly he's going to be governor of New Jersey. That's what he got elected to be, and we have to take him at his word and hope that he doesn't let all those other pressures. There are a lot of people around him who are saying, you're it, this is your time. And it is his time. If he's going to do it, this is the moment. You'll never have better exposure, better opportunity to get around to meet people in all the various states and the big fundraisers. But he does have to settle some things here in New Jersey with the budget and with some other issues and be able to point to that as his record, because that's what people are going to look to when he makes his case to the nation, if that's what he ultimately does.
Well, I'm just curious, what if you could speak maybe a little bit to your own experience in like 1995 and 1996. You were one of those Bob Dole was going to be the Republican presidential nominee, and all the talk was these Republican governors across the country who were sort of the dream vice presidential contenders, and your name was always on that list in 95 and 96. The party clearly wanted to showcase you. They had you deliver a response to the State of the Union. Your name was always sort of mentioned there for the vice presidency in 1996. What was it like being a governor and sort of living through that?
Well, I didn't pay any attention to it because I never thought it was real. It never occurred to me that was
Even when
really
you're
gonna
giving the
happen.
response to the State of the Union?
No, I didn't know why they picked me, but I thought the reason they picked me, I think, was because I actually kept my promise. So I said I was going to start to cut taxes, and we did right away, and that was a shock to people, because I can remember them saying when I first got elected, what are you going to do now? I said, cut taxes. What are you going to really do? That was the campaign. What are you going to really do? So it fit into what, at that point, Newt Gingrich was trying to do with the Republicans and to win back the House. And so they showcased me that way, but I didn't think of that as being something special. I mean, it's me. It's not anything special, not anyone particularly special. And I knew also that I was pro-choice, and the chance of that ever being acceptable anywhere in the national Republican Party was slim to none. And so I just never let it worry me. That if everybody else wanted to go running around saying that was going to happen, I never for an instant thought that was...
Ever think of becoming a Democrat? Seriously?
A lot of Republicans say that.
Well, Governor Florio, what about the idea then, can you be all the talk about New Jersey as the most constitutionally powerful governorship in the country, more responsibility here than in any other state capital for a governor. Can you be a good New Jersey governor and at the same time go out and run for president?
Well, I think Governor Christie's major difficulty will be in the Republican primary. I mean, he's going to have to, he's been very successful in New Jersey in sort of coming across to conservatives as conservatives, coming across to people who are more moderate as being moderate. But that's going to be a hard thing to continue to do for the next 4 years. And then the other thing is the point that's been raised already about the difficulties for New Jersey. And some of them are horrendous. I mean, the Transportation Trust Fund is out of money. There's no money there. All the money goes to paying off debt, as Governor Byrne talked about. The pension system, the Pension Reform Act that they passed a couple of years ago, I guess in 2010, provides in the law that for over the next 7 years, we have to pay off and bring up to speed with contributions amounts of money to make it fiscally acceptable. And that entailed, the first year was $440 million, ramped up. This year was $1.7 billion. In the last year of his administration, it'll be $5.5 billion. I don't know where you get that kind of money. That's just for the pension system. So, I mean, he's got lots of problems he's got to deal with, and you can't walk away from some of them. So he's got to deal with very unpopular issues. He's got to find money somewhere. He sort of locked himself into concrete on the Transportation Trust Fund with no increase in the gas tax. If you're going to have to find $11 billion over the next 4 years for transportation money, you just can't bond anymore. I mean, your bonding capacity runs out.
Well, however he does it, I'm sure it will be loudly and colorfully. I think we've learned that. Well, I think that take us to the end of my questions to the panel, but I think we can open this up now to questions for anybody out there for the governors. I'm not sure how you guys want to run this, but is this just anybody goes to the microphone, or how do we? Yeah, just head over to the mic if you got a question. Let's open this up to the floor. Looks like somebody's making his way right now.
Governors, with the Citizens United case and the influx of independent money, do you see an impact on the parties that you used to know?
Oh, absolutely. I don't think there can be any doubt about it, and it's going to work both ways. I mean, don't forget MoveOn.org on the Democrat side. I'm very troubled by that opinion. I am not a lawyer, so I leave it to the lawyers to tell me where in the Constitution it says that entities such as labor unions and big businesses have the right to the same protection and rights as an individual citizen, or the right of association and the ability to give unlimited amounts. And there are 2 new cases before the court that they've accepted that could take it even further and really take off all kinds of limits on contributions. And that, to me, is just enormously troubling from both sides. It changes the parties, but I'll tell you one thing where we're in a really good place in the state of New Jersey as opposed to many other states is we don't elect judges. And it really worries me in the states where they have an elected judiciary, because you start seeing these groups with very specific agendas. They want to move the bench to the right, or they want to move the bench to the left, and that's where they're putting a lot of money, and that to me is really, really scary.
Anybody else want another question?
I just want to follow up on a question, Steve, that you asked before. All of you have been through rigorous campaigns. You've been the governor while you've been campaigning in the state. Just to follow up on that Chris Christie question, because I was thinking about the famous Massachusetts miracle of 1986 having melted away by the time Governor Dukakis was in the middle of the campaign, although he soldiered through and tried to do both at the same time. Do you think it's physically possible to be the governor and a successful candidate for president?
Yes. I mean, yes, it is. And you still are the governor. And the thing in this state, as you pointed out, that being the most powerful governor, anytime you own the press in the sense that when you do something, they always cover you. When the candidate who is challenging you does something, they may or may not get covered. So that it's very possible to do both, I think.
Yeah.
I did.
I mean, one of the things that's been speculated about is that the governor won't finish the term, that he would make a decision somewhere the second year or the early third year not to just resign and say that he's going to devote full time to running a campaign. I mean, that would be plausible sounding. It's also the argument's been raised that being governor and running at the same time he's precluded from raising money from Wall Street. There are some laws and regulations that have been passed that would stop that. That would be a big impediment in terms of his fundraising requirements. We have a lieutenant governor now, so I mean, it wouldn't be the same type of situation as was the case when the governor left office. And there's a little more probably legitimacy in having a lieutenant governor rise to be the governor than there was in terms of a president of the Senate who was elected from his own senatorial district. So conceivably, that might be a game plan.
Yeah, that one year when Governor Whitman left office to go to the EPA, it's my favorite trivia question. Name the only state that had 5 governors in 1 year. It was New Jersey from 2000 to 2001.
Most governors in their second term fool around a little bit, take trips.
Please clarify, fool around.
Yeah, since we're talking about the media, at the end of even before the election was over on Election Day 2012, all the talk was about what was going to happen for the presidential election of 2016 immediately. I can't remember that starting to happen until at least into the 21st century, since we're talking about the media. And now that we see Ted Cruz and Rand Paul and Rick Perry suddenly loving Iowa and New Hampshire, they're just all over the place. Do you have to run for president the day after the last election? Is it because of the media pressure, or is it because of the money? Or could you weight those two factors, or am I missing something? Or is this just crazy?
I mean, part of the difficulty is that the media has now created imagery that everyone's interested in this all the time. And it's somewhat of a business. Media consultants, political consultants, all want to generate this interest in politics all the time because people are making money out of it. And I mean, that's a major factor.
No, I think that's absolutely right. That is a major factor, and it also is the money. It is the money. That it takes so much money to be able to run for president that you've got to start fundraising. And if Governor Christie decides this is what he wants to do, he really hasn't a choice except to resign within the next year and a half at the latest if he's going to do it, because of the amount of money you have to raise. And that's really problematic as far as I'm concerned.
So your answer is both? Would someone go out on a limb and say,
Media
which
is money.
You're
Yeah, media is
surprised
gonna-
how much of the money, that is raised in the course of a campaign is wasted, absolutely wasted. There was a Cody sign on every street corner in Millburn last week. Wasted.
I've
So
talked
you're
to
with the
some,
Rudolph Giuliani $50 million buys you one delegate club?
Well, that's all part of the money thing, the super PACs. The super PACs are the other thing that's causing, I think, a great distortion to the whole process. And particularly because they're not subject to all the same requirements that the candidates are as far as real-time releasing of the names. So you don't know who's behind a lot of them, and you don't know what the bias is. And they'll put out nice-sounding ads about one person and make the other person sound like the devil. And you know, the Citizens for Green Grass, and it turns out, no, it's a trucking industry or something like that that has a slightly different bias than what they're implying as their title. So it's a problem.
But do you have to resign? Isn't the super PAC outside of that law that says you have to get?
No, super PACs are, they're not supposed to coordinate anyway. Those are the outside groups that don't coordinate with the campaign, so they can go raise their money right now and start spending it now.
I wrote a story a while back on Christie's Wall Street conundrum, and I don't know if he would do this, but the suggested workaround is that the super PAC rules are still sort of being developed and litigated, and it's now currently legal for a candidate to attend, if a super PAC had a fundraiser for a candidate, the super PAC backing a candidate had a fundraiser to raise money for their efforts to elect that candidate, the candidate can attend. The candidate can't make a pitch at the event and say, please give money. But if the candidate happens to be in the neighborhood that night and happens to stop by this event and show up, it's perfectly legal. So the suggested workaround, but you know, that some people around Christie's orbit have suggested to me is that maybe they could have, you know, a friendly arrangement like that with a super PAC. But I'm sure that would raise lots of questions too. As a candidate, would you want to take the risk of giving up that kind of control and, you know?
Well, I think you'd want a super PAC with a nice name of, you know, Citizens for Blue Skies, and it just happens to be that they are going to support you, but nobody says that out loud right at the beginning, because otherwise I would think it would be ethically really, really problematic.
I think that's
Not
the
legally.
sub-theme of super PACs in general, ethically really,
Yes.
really problematic, right? Like,
That's my problem with them.
yes, sir.
Governor Byrne said it facetiously to you, do you want to become a Democrat? But I'm looking at the Republican Party right now. In Morris County, for example, young kid, 21 years old, runs as a conservative, knocks out a long-time Republican candidate who probably could have stayed there forever. The other candidates who come in as freeholder, I know them, they said, we're conservative. One comes in number one and number two by the fact we're conservative. Governor Christie is quoted last week, I'm a conservative. Does the Republican Party exist, or is it going to be the split all the way over to the right?
Well, there's no question that the party's moved way to the right. I mean, Governor Byrne may joke about my becoming a Democrat, but a lot of Republicans think I already am. I keep saying no. I actually am an Eisenhower Republican. I go back that far. I met the man. It's a different party than what it was back then. But interestingly enough, I think in what I've seen with a lot of the young people today, because part of my concern of what's happening with the parties, and don't be misguided, the Democrats are starting to get as much pressure from the far left as Republicans have had from the far right. We've just been at it longer, do it better, give better quotes, in more inflammatory language right now. But what you're seeing is that the voter turnout is so low that the only people who come to the polls, if the average voter turnout in a primary is 10%, that 10% is those are the most ardent partisans, and they're going to give you the most ardent partisan candidates. And that's when everybody else in the middle starts to turn off. And I don't believe that the Republican leadership in Washington is one thing, and the ones that have the reins of power in Iowa and New Hampshire are one group. The average people who used to be Republicans or still are but don't participate a lot are right smack in the center. That's where the majority of the public is, and every poll will show it. Better than 50% of the American people are right in the center. And to me, it's sad that we keep putting labels on people, and you have to have labels, because my response always when asked what I was as far as liberal, conservative, moderate, I'd say, tell me the issue, I'll tell you where I am, and then you make a decision, because it's not going to be the same on every issue.
I'd like to ask about the ferocity of lobbying these days. And Governor Floro, you got a ban on assault rifles. Is that impossible today in the current climate?
I'm sorry.
The ban on assault rifles.
The ban on assault rifles.
Apparently not. But apparently, what seems to be happening is the concentrated special interests dominate the process in-house, that is in the Congress or in the legislature. Polls have demonstrated time and time again, 90% of the people in this country would support background checks for weapons, and yet the Congress doesn't even take it up. And that's not because the public doesn't want it, the public wants it. It's because of the focus, NRA and the gun lobby and things of that sort. There are lots and lots of issues where the public is one place, but the system is dominated by the special interests to such a degree that the public interest is thwarted. So, I mean, that's the troubling factor. And that goes to money, as we've talked about it a lot today.
Any other,
I actually have two questions, if I'm allowed to jump in.
Yes.
One, looking back a bit, if you could talk about any changes that you noticed in campaigning, maybe from the days of volunteering and then through your own elections, in terms of how innovations and technologies, additional staff members versus volunteer, that ratio, how that may have changed. And then once you got to office in your transition, were there any governors in history that you looked to when setting up the structure of your administration or when trying to model the culture and the accomplishments that you were hoping to achieve?
Repeat the question.
did you have a role model? When you became governor, did you look at any previous governor sort of as a role model? This is how I want to structure my administration. This is what works for being a governor.
Well, I think everybody has their own style, I mean, in terms of how things work. I mean, my sense was I always used to be very discouraging to people who would tell me what they thought I wanted to hear. I mean, I tried to have staff people who would tell me what they thought. And then, because there's I said, if I know more than you, you're no value to me. So you've got to be telling me what you think, and then we'll come to a consensus. Then when we come to a consensus on the policy, then we'll all go out there together. Everybody's in lockstep. But if you have people who just feed you what they think you want to hear, that doesn't serve any purpose.
Yeah, I would think it probably, from my perspective, an amalgam of watching people work, but it just always seems to me it's been natural to look to the people who, as Governor Florio said, knew more than I did about an issue. I would say, listen, this is where I think I want to go. This is what I think the issue is. You tell me if I'm crazy, and if I'm not, tell me how we're going to get this done. But I'd always, as I use the analogy, I'd always rather had a cabinet member that I had to rein in than one I had to kick all the time to get going. To me, I wanted that creative thinking, and then you're the governor, so at the end of the day, they're all on your team, so this is what we're going to do or we're not going to do. But you wanted to hear outside thinking, and I can't think of obviously I respected Tom Kean. I'd been part of his administration, so I'd seen it then, and maybe that's part of how it comes, you absorb it, but I can't think of a role model that I picked, because as Governor Florio said, everybody has their own approach to things and their own take on what they're doing, on the job they're doing.
Governor Byrne, did you have a role model as governor when you took over, a governor you wanted to emulate?
Not that I'm willing to discuss.
He wanted to be the role model for future governors. I think we have another question here.
Well, since we started this morning, everybody has acknowledged that the governor of New Jersey is probably the most powerful governor in the country. And I've seen the three of you on NJN TV saying that. We've also mentioned that there's less media scrutiny lately. So if you put this together, I'm wondering, if we have such a powerful governor and so less scrutiny by the media, how do we prevent abuse of authority by the governor, since he's so powerful? And I'll just throw out one possible example to go with it. The governor had the authority to decide if and when we needed a special election to fill Senator Lautenberg's position. And we ended up having a special election 3 weeks before our general election at the cost of several $1 million. Was this abuse of authority because it didn't really do anything positive for the public? And how would you prevent abuse of authority when the governor has so much power?
How much can you get away with as governor?
I never thought, frankly, I think the fact that the governor has so much power actually gives the press much more ability to criticize and critique, because everybody knows where the problem is. It's there. I mean, if you go into office saying you're going to do certain things, of course you have a legislature, of course you have a Supreme Court. But if you don't get things done, it's you, because it's your entire team. You appoint everybody, unlike almost any other state. You appoint everybody, and so I think it makes the criticism almost, and the scrutiny almost greater. The fact that we had a special election, while I wouldn't have done it in the way that the governor did it, and I don't know why there wasn't more. There was some criticism and critiquing of it, but I think that more speaks to the nature of the press today than it does the fact that the governor is powerful.
I mean, power is relative, and the governor of New Jersey being allegedly the most powerful person, the limitations are really great. There's a wonderful book, Presidential Leadership, written by one of my professors in college, Richard Neustadt. And the whole book, if you haven't read it, is really worth reading, because it talks about case studies. I think it was the Truman administration, Eisenhower, and President Kennedy, if I recall correctly. And there were case studies about where the president wanted to do things, and the theme of the book is the president, with all his power, really has only the power of the pulpit, that he's constantly having to work very hard to get his cabinet people to do what they're supposed to be doing. And it talks about the limitations of power. And I suspect when you're in office, you're focusing more on the limitations of power than on the authority of power. And I think that's a good observation, that we're the most powerful, but that doesn't mean you're really that powerful. Ultimately, the governor made a decision about the special election. Some people supported it, some people didn't. Ultimate report card was the election. If enough people were unhappy about that being an abuse of power, it would have showed up in the election process, which it clearly did not.
I still think the governor of New Jersey wants to get something done, he can get it done.
Or she.
Yes. Or she. Your wife. Your wife.
Oh,
I sort of want to piggyback on her question. First, just how important now do you think the endorsement on the editorial page of a newspaper is important? I don't know how many of you read the endorsement that the Star-Ledger did for Chris Christie, and if you ever were leery of newspapers and the media, it was a very interesting endorsement, and I would just like to hear your comments.
If anyone in here hasn't read the Star-Ledger's, I'm going to use the air quotes, endorsement of Chris Christie, it was highly, highly critical of him, but then ultimately concluded that for some reason people should vote for him.
I've been unendorsed with more attractive features in that endorsement.
Anyone have any theories what was behind that? Was that the ledger? I'll throw it out there. This is wild speculation. Is it a newspaper that could see where the wind was blowing and wanted to make a point without needlessly alienating a governor?
They've been on the governor a lot. I mean, it's clear in their editorial policy they're not big fans of the governor, and I think this was a reflection of that, but they decided to take a stand. And frankly, I give them more credit for that than one of the very reliable conservative papers down in Virginia that always endorses Republicans, very strong paper, that looked at the gubernatorial race down there and said none of the above, because that to me was a disservice to the public, because you either should have said, okay, with all their flaws, this one or that one, or said, here's a third-party candidate you can endorse. Do a write-in, do something, but to bag it and not say anything, it was a damning with faint praise on what they did with Chris Christie, but at least they said, okay, given the choice, this is where we'd have to go, given experience and all the rest of it. May not like it, but that's what we've got. And that, to me, was more responsible than saying none of the above, when you've only got a couple of choices. Well, we had actually 7? There were 7 there were other choices on the ballot.
Well, Governor Byrne, as our representative of the Star Ledger here, what did you think of the Star Ledger's endorsement?
It's interesting to me to find out who gets invited to the editorial board meetings where they discuss endorsement selection. And it varies.
I think at the end of the day, though, to answer your question, it doesn't make a lot of difference. It's nice you use it in your ads. You'll put it up on television or in your brochures, you get it out on time. But frankly, I don't think those endorsements change a lot of opinions.
Does it matter? I wonder if it's a surprising endorsement, like if the New York Times happened to weigh in for a Republican candidate, a liberal paper weighs in for a conservative paper for a liberal, does that give it more?
Well, it gives it legs and it gets more attention, but I'm not sure it changes a whole lot of votes. Governor, you know.
Yeah.
All right, looks like another question.
Yeah, my question's for Governor Whitman. I was wondering if your role as governor made you feel adequately prepared to transcend into federal politics as the head of the EPA on the Bush administration. And I guess my second question is, do you feel that Governor Christie would also pose as an ideal candidate, given he's elected gubernatorially as opposed to maybe a congressman or a senator?
Well, I'll be biased, and I always think that someone who's had executive branch experience makes a better president than someone without any executive branch who hasn't run anything. On-the-job training is not the best when you're the leader of the free world and president of the United States. So that from that perspective, I think it is important. And it did help me going into the cabinet simply because I knew what a cabinet did. I'd had a cabinet, and I knew what I'd expected of my cabinet, so I didn't have any illusions about the extent of my role. And fortunately, New Jersey politics is tough, so I was somewhat prepared for the political part of what happened. I wasn't quite prepared for it. I was prepared to fight a 180 battle or maybe a 270 battle, but a 380 battle was a little bit more than I'd been anticipating when I first got down there. So all sides were not what I've been looking forward to. But yeah, it does prepare you, and there's no question that if you're going to run a major agency or the government, it makes a big difference. It makes a big difference.
When I first got into this business, I was working for Governor Minor, and he won a re-election in 1957, and immediately became, I talked about candidate for president. And I was with him on a couple of situations where his candidacy was discussed. And he was, the feeling at that time was that being a governor is not the way to prep for president. that you got no foreign affairs experience, you got no experience really beyond the State House. And he was widely discounted because he was a governor, not a United States senator. Now it's the opposite.
Now they say the road to the White House goes through the State House, right? Barack Obama was the first senator since Kennedy, right? Who was elected, and Kennedy was the first since. John could help me with that.
And look
Kennedy
what
was the first
happened
since
in
it was a while.
On this question of experience, though, I mean, it's interesting I spent 6 years in the legislature, then 16 years in Congress, so that legislative experience was very useful to me when I became governor in dealing with the legislature. I mean, we called upon the legislature to do some very tough things, and there's styles for being able to manage a legislature. So that experience was very useful to me.
All right, well, that's probably a good place to leave it. Give a big hand to the governors here.
Yeah.